Today is Wednesday, September 14th, 2011. I'm Matthew T.G.
I'm Steve Stanley.
I'm Heath Mulliken.
And I'm Tony Casey. Welcome to the Technology Show, a weekly podcast featuring technology, theology, and everything in between. The world's only user-antagonistic podcast. This is episode 123. Woo-hoo. Steve's been out of the studio for a month, and he almost forgot his name there. Did you notice?
That's right.
He kind of
stuttered.
Well, I'm
Steve.
disappointed to see that you fired the intern. You know, she normally holds up the cue card.
Yeah.
This is a significant episode. You know, just last weekend we had the date was 9/10/11. This is show 123. It's going to be till show 234 before we have such a significant event.
And this is why Heath's on the show, to bring out these really important things.
I'm having a flashback to Rain Man.
Gotta watch Wapner.
All right. We are so pleased and so happy today to welcome Keith and David Drury to the show to discuss their book, Ageless Faith. In a moment, we're going to jump into that. First, Wesleyan Publishing House has been kind enough to sponsor a giveaway of the book. So, Matthew, how are we going to do this today?
Oh, gracious. You know, we've been deciding how. So, basically, I don't know. I have not even fully thought that
out. All right, so towards the end of the show,
just hang in there. Yeah. After our interview portion of the show with the Drurys, we will talk about that as I try to plan and prepare how exactly we're going to give this book away. All
right. Well, Keith, David, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Good to be with you guys again.
All right. Let's just begin talking about the book, and tell us how the idea for this book came about, and what was the writing process like?
Well, the idea of the book probably came through Christmas together times, evenings, talking and arguing with each other, realizing we represent two kind of different generations, and coming to understand each other more, and then saying, you know, maybe everybody ought to have this conversation between the generations. Maybe we ought to just argue with each other for a whole book, and maybe that would open up other people's arguments, and they say, yeah, that's how I feel. Some of them identifying with me, some of them identifying with David. So yeah, that's how I feel. Whoa, I never understood that. That's kind of, so it really started in our own discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. And when he turned 60, he wrote a list of things he was going to do, and it's actually online. You can find it. And there were things like grow a beard and putter around in slippers or stuff like that was kind of mocking himself. But then one of them was to argue with his sons more, and he achieved that goal. We have argued a lot on stuff, and then all at the same time we did with the book. We wanted to capture that and try to not just argue, but to show people how to fight fair on issues that really matter for the church. And the reason we argue about this stuff is that it matters to all the generations. And some of the things, I think he won the argument, and some I think I won. I won slightly more. But anyway, so we could talk about that.
I got the feel when I was reading this book, I felt like that I just walked up to a table and the two of you were just seated there discussing, and I just pulled up a chair and listened. So I'm guessing that even there was intention on the way that you wrote the questions to one another to reflect actual gatherings at Christmas, holidays, or whatever on these particular issues.
Yeah, we really wanted to try to capture that conversational tone. You know, Dad's been writing for years and is good at that, even in his solo books. He hasn't done a book with somebody else before. I hadn't before this either. And so we experimented with a few ways of writing it and landed on this very, very conversational tone. We've even done some readings where we just read it and it felt even kind of conversational, like, wow, that almost, if you weren't looking at us reading, it might just sound like a conversation.
Well, I even like the cover of the book is actually, just a table with two chairs, and that's the feel you get. Well, for both of you, what was the most intense part of doing this book?
I mean, for me, it was hard to choose what to dialogue about because it's kind of endless possibilities. And so that was hard to choose, and so that was very, very early. And then a few of the chapters concern things. I mean, a lot of the things we actually argue about in the church are very surface level stuff, like alcohol and the definition of sanctification, when in reality, those are kind of unique Wesleyan denominational type stuff. When in reality, some of the other chapters are trans-denominational and deal with the emerging church and theological issues, like what is conversion?
Heaven.
What is heaven? And so in a way, those were a little more intense, although we do have a chapter on alcohol and a chapter on sanctification, but we also hit those other things that go a little deeper.
Probably most intense thing for me representing my generation is the realization that all the stuff, I'm kind of the first graduating boomer, kind of the first one into the kind of retirement era, kind of out of the boomers. And to the realization, which is happening now to all the guys in the 50s, I kind of chuckle at it, realizing the revolution that we brought about is going to stick. There's another one that's going to overthrow our revolution. Now, we still hold all the high ground and all the big churches and everything else. It's only a matter of time until our revolution is the tradition. So yesterday's innovations become today's tradition.
You know, you start this book by talking about worship, and the whole time I'm reading that chapter, in the back of my mind, I'm going back to something that Dr. James Dobson said in all the years he was with Focus on the Family. Of all the controversial issues that he tackled, he said, we got more mail on music than any other issue. Why do you think that's such a lightning rod? I mean, all the way through that chapter, you guys are dealing mainly, you're dealing with a lot of aspects of worship, but the majority of that is music. Why is that such a lightning rod for people?
Well, some of that is just reflective of our culture. I mean, when you turn on the radio, there are, hundreds of stations you can choose from. And that is that personal choice that our culture has trained us to do. And then, of course, that's just the radio. You go to iTunes, you can find every kind of song you want to listen to. And then you don't even buy the whole album anymore. People tend to buy just one song off that album. So they're very restricted. Dad's joked in the past that maybe we'll just have churches where everyone shows up with their iPod for the worship segment, so that you can make sure you can secretly dial in exactly the kind of worship you want. So it's consumerism, really. That's the problem. But there are some real, when we tried to get past just the surface level and into some of the richness of each era's musical tradition. And I think that's one of the problems, is I'm not sure generations value and respect some of the great things of the other ones. And so I hope that my generation begins to more and more rediscover some of that. And you've seen even that in some of the movement so far. But anyway, that's, I think, part of the dynamic.
You talk a lot about... Go ahead.
Go ahead, Keith.
Music is so emotional. I mean, it's subjective and emotion. It's like kissing. It's really personal. It's not like a universal thing.
There's a song about that.
Yeah, it really is.
And I make the argument in the book that it's a language.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so it's deeply rooted in culture. And so if you've spoken one language for like 30 years, and some young person says, oh, your language is silly, learn my language. You can see why older people just say, wait, let me at least speak my language a little bit. Give me one song or two songs. And so because it's a language of worship, I think it's really deep and emotional.
Yeah, go ahead.
You talk somewhat about the theological content of the music that is emerging, and no doubt there are cases to be made against certain songs that we've carried over from the past too, but I'm wondering if there's a legitimate concern with the theology that is expressed in some of the newer songs. And in that, I'm kind of asking whether the trend is more towards a homogenized, generic evangelical worship experience, or are we able to maintain the style of worship or the theological emphases of the Wesleyan movement in our music and our worship? Do you think that's possible today?
I think that you're absolutely right that the trend has been towards a homogenized general evangelical worship, and your generation led that trend.
Right.
And I think that for time now, the emerging church is helping to cast that and to write some songs that are a lot more direct and that lead the church theologically. And that is why we disagree with some of them. That is why you have very legitimate, like you say, theological concerns about some songs, because some movements are emphasizing things you don't agree with, and I don't agree with, probably. And so I think that's a good thing. That's a good thing where we continue to do that. And so I think it would be nice if we had more worship leaders that were examining the songs we're doing and saying, does this match what we're preaching? Does this match our doctrine and what we're trying to live? And then also finding those songs that do match it and really call it out. I know we do that a lot here there are a lot of songs we don't sing in our venues at our church. We just feel like they just don't match what we're teaching our church. And they may be a 2-year-old song, but that doesn't mean they match.
And they may be really catchy tunes too.
They are.
And a lot of worship leaders pick a catchy tune regardless of the theology. I'm really more happy with what's gone on the last 5-7 years in music than I was the previous empty songs. I think
Climate change.
I don't mean my generation.
Oh, yeah.
I meant yours. Repetitive praise songs, which were okay.
Yeah. I could sing this song forever, and they did.
I think that you're
just kind of
trance worship.
I think that your use of language is helpful, because I do think that it is a language. It's the way that we understand. It's the way that we worship. Now, but also when you use that, then to me it ups the ante a little bit, because we know that when worship is done in our own language, it's probably more meaningful. So it seems to me that it just heightens the challenge that the church has, doesn't it, in terms of trying to reach each generation in their language?
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of churches have found multiple venues, multiple church plants, multiple settings, campuses, and so forth, to be part of the intermediate solution that creates another problem. It creates yet another challenge to say, well, are we really intergenerational? And so the challenge, my church is this, because we're a large church with multiple venues, with multiple styles, is to constantly get people back together during the week and in small groups and in classes and so forth. So but smaller churches have a bigger challenge because they're trying to do it all in an hour.
Yeah.
And so they sort of have to do what we try to do in a week in 75 minutes. And, I think part of what Dad said is true. You sort of have to think of it literally as one song. We think of it as a whole service.
Yeah.
Keith, in the chapter on evangelism, I pulled out a quote, and I'm going to read that, and then I've got a question for both of you. Here's the quote. Soon you will be making changes to the church. Then your kids will rise up to ask similar questions. Be wary. With every change, there come unintended consequences, yet things still need to change, even if you are changing some things back to what my generation got rid of. Keith, my question for you is, what would you say is one change your generation made that maybe they shouldn't have? And David, what's a change that our generation needs to make?
Oh boy, I make a long list of things probably my generation changed for change's sake. And some of them, the emerging generation is actually changing back, which is why they get so much kickback from my generation, because we said, I remember when our worship service was dark and dingy. That's why we put all these lights in here. How come you want to turn the lights out to worship yet? I mean, that's a little thing. But
right.
I think maybe the one change my generation made without thinking is probably the highest risk change to me is the reduction of contact hours with people in the church. My generation ministers quietly wanted to get rid of prayer meeting, get rid of Sunday night, put Sunday school in the back burner, or if you just look at the statistics in my denomination, you can just see this. It worked. And focus on 1 hour a week that's high quality and features me, the pastor. I think I think without thinking about reducing those contact hours, where church is an hour a week for a lot of our people, we changed the nature of in the street Christianity, or in the home or at the job Christianity in our churches without thinking. Now, we tried to do things, hey, join a small group, do that. But boy, if you look at the numbers, most of the people bought what my generation did, which is sort of downsize the number of hours you spend at church. And then wonder, gee, how come people don't take their religion seriously?
Wow. David?
Well, I think as far as what we should change, I mean, again, there's a long list, but I think we should change at least two things, and that's lives and leadership. By changing lives, and we address this in the conversion chapter of this book, that I think my generation has a real concern about hypocrisy, a real concern that we have a lot of people that have kind of gotten their ticket to heaven and haven't had their lives changed. And I'm not sure we're that good at expressing that. Instead, we attack conversion methods instead of saying what we really are trying to say, which is that we aren't seeing lives change. So we should work on that. And I do think that every generation sees lives change, but I think we need to make sure that's core. And then leadership, and we talk about this in the book too, with denominational leadership and ministry and so forth, that I think our leadership needs to become more open and more involved. And some of this is a challenge because we're not naturally involved. You have to, be either gray or bald and certainly old to become a delegate to anything.
What?
And so you have to go. I mean, I've been doing this, just go and watch. Go and watch. You don't have a vote. I go to general conferences as a spectator event, as though it's WWF.
Yes.
And just watch it. Even though I don't have a vote, I don't have any power in the denomination at all, other than just my voice. And what's funny, though, is I found that presence over time helps. And, of course, we talk about that because I think that's a difficult one. But I do think we need to open it up to more generations. And what I hope we don't do is, as we become more and more leaders of the church, I don't want us to exclude any generation. So whereas a lot of people think this is a generational thing, most emerging leaders I find really value intergenerational ministry at a high level, and they love the older people in particular to say, man, you've got all kinds of wisdom I don't. Plus, they're the ones that have been married 60 years. And we're like, whoa, that's impressive. How did you do that?
I don't want to make general conference complicated, but it's interesting to me, given the technologies that we have today, to look at how we set up general conference. We gather every 4 years. There was good rationale for that and a time when, before we had the technologies we have now, in terms of just trying to get Wesleyan delegates together. And it's been interesting to me now that we have the ability to stream a conference live, that someone halfway around the world, anywhere in the world, can watch it on a 1, 2, 3 second delay on what's happening. And I don't know, I'm not saying I know how to take these technologies necessarily and use them to further the conversation. I'm just saying that for the first time in history, we have the ability to do that. And interestingly enough, you're probably going to have a generation that's a little bit more savvy about that. My generation and younger, as far as these technologies. But I mean, we have the ability, it seems to me, to go beyond a spectator sport, as you put it, and to garner questions and to get people involved in the process in ways that we couldn't have a generation ago and before.
True. And I found that most people in leadership are a little keener on that than even some in their own generation. So, for instance, I find that I get responses pretty quick to emails, even tweets and Facebook posts from officials you wouldn't expect to hear from in our denomination. And since you brought up General Conference, I do think that there'll be a lot of people who will be harnessing technology to open up the conversation, something our generation needs to really help with. And then also a cool thing that I just heard about this week is there's a whole group of people as a grassroots movement who are going to do a bunch of serving in the community in Lexington.
Wow.
So there are a lot of the people like me that go as spectators that are going to say, hey, let's go and let's watch what's happening, but then let's also make an impact on Lexington. I just heard about that this week.
Very good.
From Minneapolis, so that should be cool.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Go ahead, Keith.
Remember, this certainly is going to be online, isn't it? You know?
I presume.
Okay, we are hoping that it will. In fact, we've been in conversation with the Department of Communications to see could we be people that help with that. In fact, they picked our brain. I fired up a nice long thing about different options and ways to go about doing that. So I'm hoping that it will be either through us or through somebody else at least.
So contact your local delegate and let them know you want the technology show at General Conference.
Right now in my studies, I have been doing a lot with issues of race, especially looking at the Wesleyan Church in terms of what I call its kind of contrasting histories, its founding and the whole issue of the abolitionist movement and then the civil rights movement. And to use your language in the book, the Wesleyan Church was AWOL on that. You guys have a great conversation about race in this book and racism. My question is pretty specific. Should the Wesleyan Church, in your opinion, and I know this is just opinion, should the Wesleyan Church have a public confession about being AWOL during the civil rights movement?
Well, I think that, I mean, that's fraught with all sorts of problems because you can do that really lame and cause more harm than good. But it seems to me like the start of the conversation is not should we do a confession, but the question of do we have anything to confess? Mm-hmm. That's where we start in the book.
Very good.
And I think the case I'm making is we do. We do have something to confess. We were AWOL during this key time. I told the story about African-American pastor who came in, and we all on our BBMD that I was on, developing this minister, we all said, boy, you as an African-American, have you found our rich history as being abolitionists to be really exciting for you? And he was very diplomatic. He was like, yes, I've really learned a lot about that in seminary, and then he was the one who actually said to me, boy, but the church was really AWOL in this key time for people like me. And so I think it's that. As far as doing a service, I think that could be useful. You mentioned just a moment ago the online thing. I think that's probably the ticket for that. Something that's viral, something that's shorter, and maybe even it's just something that we could do as leaders or do at a convention of some kind. But certainly, just having one in my church, for instance, doesn't have the broad sense of saying, we shall never turn back, and this is our vision for the future.
Yeah.
That's my thing. And really, in the end, I'm not sure you disagreed with that much, other than some of my more egregious insults to me.
No, I didn't. In fact, I offered the fact that there were a few people who were active.
Yeah.
People who, however, if you go to the abortion thing, let's jump ahead to the most recent social issue. How many of you got arrested for abortion? And you say, oh, well, I was against it. I went and did one of those life change one Sunday afternoon, yeah. And yet didn't do the radical action. It could be in the current generation, you may be just as embarrassed in the future, let's say abortion wins, as a lot of my colleagues who didn't march, who didn't ride the bus, but who had the same position as people today have about abortion. They're against it, they speak to their friends about it, but they don't take the radical action.
Yeah.
That's the AWOL part. When we say AWOL, it's mostly on the radical action. The denomination made early statements pro-civil rights, both Pilgrim Holiness, Wesleyan Methodist, early on.
Yes.
Strong. But as far as taking the radical action, the getting arrested for it, only a few did that.
Yeah.
Boy, that's convictional thought.
Yeah, well, I think for me, I loved the chapter. I think you guys handle this so well in the book. And for me, part of my research has been going through district journals in the Southeast from 1959 to 1970. And I think that when I say confession, I think that there are specific things. And we actually have in some of our district journals where we make it clear that we are against the civil rights movement. I mean, there are actually, I could pull out the quotes where we go on record in some districts. Now, it's easy for me to sit here 50, 60 years later and shoot pot shots. And so it's very hard to make decisions in the midst of the storm. And so that's not, my goal here isn't to tear people down, but it is to say there are times we do get it wrong, and that confession is something, especially in the holiness movement, that we sometimes have a problem with, because sanctified people don't need to confess. I mean, that's kind of the idea that we've had, and so I think it could be helpful if done tastefully.
If I may interrupt, we lost our prophetic voice. This was our unique claim in the realm of the social application of the gospel. And there were places where the holiness movement lived this out. In Frazersburg, Ohio, the Church of the Nazarene experienced a revival through which many of my extended family came to know the Lord. This would have been in the 30s and 40s, and it went into the then Wesleyan Methodist Church, which is why my grandfather was won to the Lord. Out of this came a social homogenization of the races. We had a lot of cross-fellowship between African American, Wesleyan Methodist churches and Nazarene churches in the area. When the Black Panthers sent, I don't know how many busloads, but there was more than one, to Zanesville High, because it was kind of midtown USA, and they came there with a specific agenda of stirring up trouble, trying to show that things are not okay in the town. They were met at the city limits by African American citizens who said, yes, we have problems and we have issues, but what we've found is that the gospel has done more to help us than a radical or violent agenda. Now, this is a story that's not been well told, but I was there when this happened. I was living in the area at the time. We do have something that we have to say, I feel, from my perspective, to African Americans.
That I hear from your story and from Dad's as well is, though I do think a service would be legitimate, Tony, it may be we need to just learn the lesson for the future and work together with our brothers and sisters of all races and ethnicities to make sure we don't lose our prophetic voice again on whatever it is now. Now, at the same time, if we were to have a long conversation about what do we need to be prophetic about right now, there would be a great amount of disagreement. So these things are divisive to their core, or they would not be prophetic.
Yeah.
Let me talk two things in, too. One is, let's remember when we say the Wesleyan Church lost its prophetic voice, the people are all dead that were around in 1843. You know, a church is, I mean, even if we want to talk about, remember the 1950s, well, where are those people? I mean, the Wesleyan Church is full of maybe 90% people who weren't even in the Wesleyan Church in 1950. And so we're a moving target. Besides the fact that a whole bunch of the real reformers went back into Methodism after the Civil War, I mean, besides that, we're a moving, and they said, oh, let's be against alcohol, let's be against secret society. I mean, you know, it's a kind of a moving target. Second thing I'd say is you emergent types write the resolution and take it to the district. Whatever district you're talking about, whoever's a member of that district who isn't writing a resolution today of confession, I mean, if it's on the books, the other statement, put a new one on the books so someone in 50 years from now reads that one. I mean, at least you can do kind for kind. And who in the world in whatever state you're talking about would refuse to vote for that simple confession? And it'd be another kind of, hey, all in, baby. You know, what are you going to do? Some of those little things can be done. Confessions nationally can be done too. Those statements, I'm not against putting them on the books. I think that's a positive thing.
Very good. Listen, we want to be sensitive to your time. We know that Keith has to get to a class here pretty soon, so let's try to wrap this up a little bit. There's a lot we haven't gotten into, more we wanted to. Let's just ask this question. How do you envision the local church using this book?
Well, one of the things that's happened that we've been really encouraged by is churches that have more than one generation in them, which is most churches, have gotten together 2 small groups or 2 Sunday school classes or even a staff that's multi-generational and gone through the book, and it has encouraged dialogue and the kind of arguing we did, fighting fair, we think, to start talking about these issues, and also to not be one-trick pony arguers. Some groups they argue about the same thing all the time, whether it be worship or alcohol or race, and we're trying to say, hey, let's bring more of these things to the table. And so that's what's worked, it seems best, is to get people in dialogue together. And then we really suggest that in the back of the book, and several people picked up on that. That's probably the best tool, the best way to use it. There's a great study guide at the back that Dad mostly wrote, which really helps to get the dialogue going.
Anything to add to that, Keith?
Well, that was our hope for this. There are a lot of people just reading it and gaining understanding of the other generation and not going the second step. Hey, there are 2 steps to this process. Read the book and then say, hey, I need to talk to someone in the other generation, not just talk to, if you're an older person, talk to David, but to be able to talk to your own son or daughter or younger generation in the church. The issue we haven't talked much about is the shift in how we do conversion. That's a massive shift that I think the younger generation not thinking through carefully enough. We have to do this. We have to do the shift. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But you have to think through. Whoa, what does this mean to a whole lot of other things? And so that kind of thinking through together, and that's what older generation can offer. The kind of 4 spiritual laws generation, like going door to door, great, all that. They have something to at least enrich this kind of. May take you a couple decades to get saved, but we own the journey. I mean, those 2 things together, we need to talk that through together so we do forge something good for the future.
Oh, very good. David, I also know that you guys are about ready to start the Soul Shift tour. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we are, and actually it relates to what Dad was just saying. There's been an aversion to actually having any kind of tools to help people grow spiritually. We talk about conversion, have different methods, and I'm not sure any generation has figured that out well. And that's why we developed Soul Shift, to say, what does it actually mean for us to think about a transformed life, to begin with a transformed life in mind, and to describe that with Soul Shift. We did a show with you guys that described all that. And we're doing a tour. It starts October 4th in Indiana, then goes to Michigan at a couple dates, and then down to the Carolinas. We're in Greensboro in mid-October, and then we go up to Pennsylvania, and then a couple dates out west as well in California. But those people down near you guys could go to Greensboro. It'd be a great thing. I hope to see you guys there. I think a couple of you are going to go.
Sure.
But it should be a great event. The idea is Pastor Steve, Denef, and I are really leading a retreat for leaders to say, what if you considered spiritual formation to be the number 1 job of ministry instead of all the other things we get caught up in? And so we're asking that question, helping people think about how do you do that in your church. And we've got a whole band coming with some stuff because the Shift CD comes out October 4th as well, so it should be kind of fun.
I'm excited to see all those other resources that are going to go hand in hand with
Yes,
it.
sir.
Is there a website you can steer us to?
Yeah, the Ageless Faith is on Facebook. There's some interaction there going on even this morning. And then the OurSoulShift.com website, OurSoulShift.com, is the portal for all the different resources and stuff that's coming out. Great videos to see, post online, and so forth.
All right. Well, Keith, David, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules. We appreciate this. We just hit the tip of the iceberg with this book. Hopefully we've whet some people's appetite and that they'll use this as a resource in their church.
Yeah.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, it's good to be with you guys. Good conversation. Glad to argue with you guys, too.
Blessings on you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
All right, here. Oh, good stuff. When I say we got to the tip of the iceberg, we did. They one of the things question number 6 has to do with, they have a whole chapter on alcohol and where we are with that right now. Mm-hmm. It's a great chapter. You need to read it. I think that they go back and forth on this. It's critical thinking. Mm-hmm. They really raise a lot of the dimensions of this, and also I thought that opening chapter on worship was just outstanding.
I think one of the most powerful things for me as I was reading this book is, you could have two ministers from different generations to have the conversation that they have, and it could get very contentious, and it could get but for a father and son, they can say things to each other in a way you can't say to just anybody else. And so to me, that's part of the power of the book, is their ability to be totally honest. And it's definitely, a book worth, it's a must read. It's great even if you're not a Wesleyan.
Yeah, great critical questions and critical comments, but done in a spirit that is constructive and gets us down the road.
Yes, absolutely.
And probably for any church that is, our church is, goodness, we've got such a wide age range.
Yeah.
What a great, what an interesting thing maybe to bring a sense of unity and understanding among people. It's got me thinking about how to utilize this in my local church.
Well, on the alcohol issue, Keith talks about some great rationales as to why this became a membership commitment historically, and why there's a generation that wants to hold on to this. Also, the issue of how many other subjects or issues come up that are not membership commitments, but that we feel very passionate about. And so it raises the question, well, why is this a membership commitment, that not a membership commitment? And so it's good conversation. Let's talk a moment here about the giveaway, and then we'll go to the download of the week.
All right,
Matthew.
so here's how we're going to do it this time. Instead of tagging our show on Facebook, we are just going to have you like the show and put a comment on our wall on Facebook that says, I would like to win Ageless Faith or something of that matter. I know we've got a few in the chat room that have already done it.
Yes.
Drew Allison was first. But that's not how we're giving it away this time. So we just want to give both our live listeners and our people who will download this later and listen to it a chance to get in on that and have that opportunity to win. So go to Facebook, like the Techology show page, put a post on our wall, and we will collect all those together. And next week we will announce the winner of our copy of Ageless Faith.
I would love to. I don't think it's any secret. We're all hoping to be at General Conference and doing some recording. And I would love to sit down with David and Keith at General Conference and just get their play-by-play commentary.
They would be
on some of the
they
things.
would be the fun people to have set up in like a booth setting where like the sports commentators.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It really would be.
Oh, wouldn't it be? It'd be the best.
It'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to.
Oh yes, let's.
Download of the week.
All right. Again, I know it's been 2 weeks in a row, but we're doing another Mac download of the week, and that's just because that's what I use. That's what the majority of the people in this room use, and if the PC people in this room would like to submit a download of the week, they are invited and welcome to. However, our download of the week for this week is called Clean. It is a free app in the Mac App Store, and I love what it does. My virtual desktop on a computer oftentimes ends up looking very similar to my physical desktop in my house, where there's just a lot of stacks and clutter of things, and it's basically like if I'm working on a project and there's things that I'm pulling off the internet, like pictures, stuff like that, it all gets dropped to the desktop first. Well, Clean is a app that will take the desktop and every day create a folder in any place you designate it, like in your documents or whatever folder you say, that will date. It'll say like Monday, or well, we'll just use today, Wednesday, September the 14th. And anything that I put on the desktop that day will automatically get gathered and put into a folder where it keeps it all sorted by day of what you've got. It can do it, I think, on different periods of time. I think you could probably do it like every week to do that, or month, or however you wanted to. But it's basically just a way to take the whole collection of stuff off your desktop, give you a nice clean desktop to look at and to use during the day, and organize it on a schedule like that. Free little app that does that. It just makes in my opinion, life simple. I use that in a combination of another app called Hazel, which I won't get into. It's not a free download. It actually costs something. I got it through like a Mac Heist bundle or something like that. But it also does file organization automatically. But if you're looking for something to keep your desktop clean and you're running on a Mac, clean the app. Free in the Mac App Store, and we'll have the link in our show notes as well for how you can get there and get that.
If the internet slows down, it's because I'm actually downloading that app right now.
What are you doing downloading it now, Heath?
I'm multitasking.
Yeah,
Oh, I love it. I'm glad. I'm
Bogging
glad
the
someone's
show
already
down.
found some use
Yeah.
there. It's great a lot.
Also, let me say to our listeners, our viewers, if you have a suggestion for download of the week, just email us at the technology show at gmail.com, and we'll be glad to slip that in. We like to use free apps or apps that are just $1-2 bucks.
Nominal cost, right?
Yeah, something really cheap. So if you have an idea, especially PC people, send us an email, and we'll be glad to give you a shout out and put it into the show lineup. All right, on to They Said It.
Yes, it is. Wow, I am so behind. Here we go.
Read my lips.
I'm going to say this again. I've never taken steroids or HGH.
I took the initiative in creating the internet.
The Macintosh, of all the machines I've ever seen, is the only one that meets that standard.
I'm not a crook.
If you know what you're doing here, slide out.
If it's launched at the right price with enough supply, we see Amazon's tablet easily selling 3 million to 5 million units in Q4 alone, disrupting not only Apple's product strategy, but other tablet manufacturers as well. Sarah Rotman-Epps of the Forrester research firm already touting Amazon's rumored tablet computer a success. Source, Mashable.
What concerns me is when complementarians insist that only egalitarians are selective in their hermeneutic, and that complementarians alone honor the authority of Scripture by refusing to, quote, pick and choose. Rachel Evans contending that complementarians also pick and choose when it comes to the role of women in ministry. Source, RachelHeldEvans.com.
There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about it. God sent me to prison to set me free. American Heather Mercer in a recent Christianity Today interview reflecting on her imprisonment in Afghanistan at the hands of the Taliban. She was arrested for sharing the gospel. Source, Christianity Today.
So Amazon hasn't even released a tablet yet, and it's going to be the big contender.
The thing is that they're trying to compete with the iPad, but they're not trying to duplicate the iPad. You know, the price point is $250 or less.
That's what they're saying.
That's what they're saying.
That's what
Again,
they're saying.
This is nothing that Amazon has announced yet.
Oh,
Now,
this is official. I read it on the internet. It has to be true.
I would not be shocked, and it would be a very wise move for Amazon to price that way. But it's, again, nothing's official yet on this. Looks interesting, though, especially with the conversation that's going on now with this idea of a Netflix for books.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Where with an Amazon Prime subscription and then, again, I can't really say nominal fee for a tablet, but, $100, $150, $200 for this tablet, and then some kind of book subscription to where you already have that. Now, the truth is we do already have a Netflix for books. It's more of a Redbox for books.
It's called
But
the
it's called
library.
That's right.
I knew that was coming.
Now, here's my question. I thought that I read somewhere that when you buy the tablet, it's only Wi-Fi. It's not 3G or anything. But that buying the tablet, you got Amazon Prime with it. I may be wrong about that.
That's rumored. That's some of the speculation, but it's not a done deal yet.
Nothing's confirmed yet
Yeah.
on any of this. But it is interesting, and it will be interesting to see what they do.
I do think Amazon will be different because I'm not sure that you can compare it with the iPad, because I think that the two devices are going after two different audiences, two different areas. Amazon is going to produce a tablet that maximizes Amazon.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's going to be their storefront, basically.
Right. Very
so,
good.
like,
Very
it's
good.
it's like window shopping. You wonder, well, how do I get this stuff from Amazon? There's not actually a store. It's all online. Well, now I can go window shopping right on this
Great
device.
analogy.
Get books. Get
Right.
Whatever.
Well, and they've
Whey
already
protein.
changed some of the look and feel of their page.
Yeah.
I don't know the word I'm trying to use, tablet.
Esque.
Yeah.
They're cleaning it up. Yeah, it's
Right.
sleek. Yeah. Rachel Held Evans here.
Yeah, we need some background on this story. Can I
Go ahead.
actually sent this to you.
Go
Rachel
ahead.
Harold Evans is very controversial, but a very good writer. I'd encourage you to check out what she's done. She's going through this thing right now where she's been, for the past year, examining biblical womanhood, where she said, if we were to take everything that the Bible says about women and what they should do, Old Testament and New Testament, what would it be like to live like that? And so I don't know how to, I don't want to cause a big stir here. I don't know how to say this. I'm going to try to put it gently, but she literally is having a time that happens about every 4 weeks where she's living in a tent outside of her house.
Wow.
And she's taking this very, very seriously. But anyways, she's just trying to examine, particularly with the role of women in ministry, what's going on and how do we interpret what the Bible has to say on that. And so she's calling John Piper out in this article, who was asked, this individual came and said, I think it was Beth Moore. I like to listen to Beth Moore. I think that she's a great biblical teacher. What do you have to say about that? And the answer that he gave was, well, it's okay to listen to her speak, but she shouldn't be the primary source of spiritual guidance in your life. And what she's saying is, what Piper is saying is, he's agreeing with the first half of a phrase out of Scripture.
1 Timothy 2:12.
Yeah, which, do you have it there?
I do.
Go ahead.
The man was likely referring to 1 Timothy 2:12, in which the Apostle Paul states, I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. Or possibly 1 Corinthians 14:34, in which he says women should remain silent in churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission. And Piper goes on to affirm Beth Moore. It's okay to read as long as she doesn't become your spiritual authority in your life. And what she says is, wait a minute, John, you are overlooking the be silent in the church. So
if you're going to take the first half of the verse literally, why not the
second half? And her point is this, that complementarians are picking and choosing, that Piper's picking and choosing.
Well, but for anybody that's listening that's not aware of the issue and how to resolve it, just let me add this to the mix, that he cannot be speaking about utter silence or lack of leadership in the church, because if you'll back up just 3 chapters to chapter 11, he gives very explicit instructions that a woman is to have her head covered if she's going to prophesy or pray publicly in the church.
We agree with this.
Well, I understand that, but some people may be picking up on the argument and think, well, hey, why does the Bible say that, and why aren't we paying attention to it? What I want to say is, what's being spoken of there is distracting conversation. They sat, we think, separately, and for her to holler across and say, hey, Ralph, what did the preacher mean by that? Or why aren't you doing that in the house? This was a disruption. Right. It's the kind of chatter. So she needs to be silent, not in submission to him, but in submission to what's going on in the service. So that Paul says specifically, outsiders won't say we're barbarians. And to barbarians, the Greek word for barbarian, it was barbar, which comes from this idea that when you heard someone else talking in a language you couldn't understand, it sounded like they were going bar, 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 bar.
Right.
So in other words, he wants clarity.
So we agree with you completely. I mean,
no,
I totally agree.
I know that. I'm just suggesting that if somebody comes into the conversation and doesn't know
Right.
this background, then they'll say, well, why are you ignoring that scripture? And my point here was just simply to say that's not what Paul means.
Yeah.
That's a very 21st century application.
And that's her point too.
Right.
That's the point she's trying to make here as well.
She's right.
One of the issues I had in the denomination that I grew up in, which was not the Wesleyan Church, was, they did not allow
LDS.
They did not allow women to be pastors, but they had 2 main offerings throughout the year for missionaries, and they were both named after female missionaries. And
Lottie Moon.
Lady Armstrong. So anyway, so here's the deal. You've got these women can't be pastors, but we honor them as missionaries. And what are they doing as missionaries? They're doing everything a pastor does. They're So you're saying, well, we should let the women be silent, but they can teach children's church. They can lead the nursery. They can be in charge of Bible school. They can lead worship. Or can you let them preach? I mean, I don't know.
Well, you better know. You're a Wesleyan pastor.
I tell you, there's a great. We had Keith Drury on today, and
we did.
He had a wonderful article, maybe a year or two ago, maybe longer, about women in ministry and about if he had daughters that were called into ministry. And I would you go to his website and with drurywriting.com/Keith. And it's just a great read. And as a father of twin girls, I mean, I thought long and hard about that. So,
the story that Steve read here, I think that a lot of us have forgotten about Heather Mercer. Yeah. Heather and I'm trying to think of her friend now. The two of them, Curry was her last name. They were arrested, and they went to Afghanistan as missionaries prior to 9/11, a few months before. And she talks about facing her fears of death, that this calling certainly was one where she was putting her life on the line. She knew she was putting her life on the line. And it's an article that just renews my respect for her, but also this whole idea that God calls us to an ideal that may sometimes put our lives at risk. Mm-hmm. And in American Christianity, and I'm part of that, I'm certainly not trying to separate myself from it. I mean, we have a very comfortable form of Christianity in this country. Mm-hmm. There may be things in the government we don't like, and there may be things that we see morally and ethically that concern us, and we ought to be concerned. But my point is this, that none of us here this morning woke up with this sense of a threat to our lives or our livelihood because of the stance that we're making. And so, just really commend this article as a resource.
Well, her whole... Oh, sorry. We're on a different article now. Blah! Never mind. Scratch that.
Well, you want to go back to the...
Let's move forward and slap Steve in the face with his own microphone.
It's only fair. I suppose this is ageism, isn't it?
No.
Well, again, I really recommend the Christianity Today article about Heather Mercer. It's an interview, is what it is, and you'll find it very interesting, inspirational as well. And I think that for pastors, part of our responsibility to our people is to remind them and to remind ourselves the call of God and what the call of God brings to our lives and the sacrifice that we're called to make.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Multitasking.
Which you don't do well.
That's right. I can't keep up with the chat room and the conversation here at the same time.
All right. Let's move on to our last story. Wouldn't you know that it is Steve Stanley who sends us this story here?
This is truly a tragic story. It ends
from
badly.
whose point of view, man?
All points of view. I first of all, I find myself married at a time such a woman is available.
Here's the headline. CBS News out of Los Angeles reporting. Woman's home had 2,000 stolen library books everywhere.
The woman's value system is right. It's just her method of pursuing it.
To put that in perspective, I mean, the gentleman here in the studio, they can look back behind them. I've got some books there. Now, there are about 600 books right there on the shelf. She had 2,000 of them.
That's a big book bag.
Oh man!
He says it like it's a bad thing. That's what I'm.
But she's trying to get out, and the alarm goes off, and they find out. And these books, I guess the value are well over $5,000. But she also had DVDs too. I mean, she was taking.
Yeah.
Well, she didn't discriminate against media.
What I can't understand is how you could have 2,000 books worth only $5,000.
Right.
I don't know if you bought Pulp Fiction books for that.
But how do you at some point?
Okay, she wasn't stealing the academic books. Okay.
Well, these books were about cooking, crafts, and animals, and nobody's really missing the Rachel Ray section of the library.
That was
great.
the best line of the
We'll get a
show right
takedown
there.
notice because of your slam again.
And to Nashville pastor in the chat room, she was stealing only books that had pictures.
What was more funny than the story to me is that Steve is the one that found the story and sent it to me. For those of you that don't know Steve, his library, you walk into his office, he probably has 2,000 books in that office. Do you even know how many books you have, Steve?
No. I know that overall I have about 20,000 books, but you can't have all those out because there's a Sunday school class downstairs. I have this picture in my mind. If I put shelves in and loaded them down with books, one Sunday morning the floor would collapse. It'd be like a hoarder.
Have you read them all?
Well, some of them you wouldn't read if they're dictionaries or so forth.
Oh, gotcha.
Or encyclopedias.
Gotcha.
But most of them.
How many dictionaries do you need?
Well, I don't have that.
Heath,
many.
have you seen the show Hoarders?
Oh,
I just referred to that. So
intervention, baby.
Yeah, that's it.
Intervention.
We're gonna have a book intervention.
You can have my books when you prime from.
If we make it to episode 200, it'll be a special edition, and it's a book intervention, and we're gonna try to free Steve from
from the guy whom everywhere you look in the place, there's old radios.
Steve's sitting there amongst all these books, and he's got a cat, and he's just kind of stroking it. He's like,
no cat! Hurt the books!
Hairless cat.
It's easier for me to point out someone else's addiction here.
Yeah.
That's
funny.
All right. Well, great story.
I'm
there.
glad that you can
I
laugh at my
don't have
weaknesses.
any addictions.
As he hoists his 44-ounce caffeine.
Yeah. Coming up next week, we have our good friend with us, Devin Sheets.
Wait a minute, we have a good friend?
How
How much are we paying for that?
Friend of the show.
And you notice Steven and Marcy were not in the chat room today.
No.
They had
colluding.
Steven contacted me yesterday and said that they're both at a conference together, won't get over till today, and that they were really bummed that they weren't going to be.
Well, that's why we make our show available for download.
That's
right.
Yeah.
Yep.
But Steven will be with us next week, and he's actually going to contribute some of the stories, and just a good friend of the show. Look forward to having him on September the 28th. Joan Rampey will be in studio and going to be discussing the whole issue of discerning the will of God in the midst of unexpected change. When life just throws you a curveball, where is God in the midst of all of that? I just need to do some follow-up. We have like 3 or 4 things just hanging out there where I just need to get final confirmation. We have mentioned the last couple weeks, our very first show in 2012, Mark Batterson is going to be our guest, and he's going to be talking about a new book that he will have just launched and will be promoting, and we're glad to be a venue for that.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right, Brother Heath Mulliken, where can people find you if they absolutely need to see you?
If they're totally desperate, they can go to chaseyourlion.com, and there's got all my links to Twitter and Facebook and my other blog, and so.
Can they get any kind of fantasy football advice?
That would be on our no. But we are creating a blog for our fantasy football league, so that'll be up soon.
Yeah,
Wow,
okay.
It's going to be some great reading.
Yeah.
It is.
Steve, where can our listeners find you?
You know, I don't know. I've been kicking around. On the way over here today, I was kicking around this idea. We ought to open a one of those caller lines where they can call in and sell things. So maybe that's where you'll find me soon, is a podcast that sells things, and you just call in, and then people can, if they're not. Oh, well, no. Kind of like, these things where they call the radio station, I've got a lawnmower, and it's got a blowed piston, and needs oil.
I don't know anything about that.
It's AM radio. It's before your time.
That's right. It doesn't come in an iPhone. But at any rate, you can find me at Facebook.com/Steve.Stanley.
All right. Matthew.
I'm at MatthewTG.com.
All right. You can find me at
Wonderful.
Facebook.com/AKC64. If you want to do any further research on anything we discussed today, you can find all the links to the stories we've covered at our website, thetechnologyshow.com. If you want to contact us, send your emails to thetechnologyshow@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail by calling us at 3049-THEOLOGY. That's 304 986-5649. And once again, Matthew, we have a giveaway.
Yeah, so thanks to Wesley Publishing House for sponsoring that. They are actually the ones that are funding that for us. So thank you, Wesleyan Publishing House, for sponsoring a giveaway of Ageless Faith. You can enter to win by going to facebook.com/The Techology Show. Like our page on Facebook, put on the wall there, post on the wall, I'd like to win Ageless Faith. I'd like to have Ageless Faith. I don't know, it's going to sound awkward however you write it, but put it on there, and we will aggregate those next week at this time. We will announce the winner randomly chosen from those entries on the podcast.
And also, let me tell you that we ended up with an extra copy of the book Waypoints by...
Spiritual Waypoints by Dr. Weitzel.
Thank you very much. And next week, we're going to give that away in the chat room. So if you join us live next week, that is going to also be a giveaway.
Yes.
As always, thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Adios.
How about a Justin Bieber tune?
No.
So show up on YouTube. Come on. Come on.
We got
Justin Bieber, I dare you. Take this episode down. I dare you, Justin Bieber.
They shut you down.
Shut us down.
They sure did.